I was working at the time as the executive sous chef of the facility, 128 employees, $12 million in food and beverage, and we were right in the midst of the season. Got up just like any other day and rolled out of bed and fell to the floor. I couldn't close my hands. I couldn't stand straight. And after a couple rounds of prednisone, my very best friend, because after all, I could get to work, I was diagnosed with non-specific arthritis at the age of, you know, now, after 30 years in the industry and 2 back surgeries, I guess I was just too stubborn to understand what my body was trying to tell me. So the only option it had to communicate with me was to create this overarching inflammation in my body that had me absolutely paralyzed. You see, for me, I could deal with pain. Getting up and going to work and gutting through a shift, I could do that. I could pull myself up off the stainless steel table and get anything that needed to be done, done. But it was a whole other paradigm for me when I couldn't even grasp a knife without it falling out of my hand. Then I had to really question, what the hell was going on? What was my body trying to tell me? For no other reason except I had no other option, I went on a little sabbatical. Took some time away from this particular property. Now, the doctor wanted to put me on methotrexate, which is a cancer drug, and I thought that's probably not in the highest for me and my body. And the specter of basically being crippled for the rest of my life really scared me, really scared me. So, as I said, I took a hiatus away from the business for a little bit. And without any medication, all the symptoms disappeared. And that left me going down a rabbit hole of what the hell was going on. Now, it wasn't just me. The executive chef of the hotel was bent over perennially, shuffling. As a matter of fact, yesterday in the lobby, I was watching a few folks traverse the carpet, and I could recognize the little hitch in the step that probably said that they had a bad back, or that their hips were bothering them, or that their knees were trouble. So I had to try to figure out whether or not it was the business I was in, or how I was being in the business I was in. Because up until that point, I had been trained and coached and led by some really, really great chefs. And their message was pretty clear. You get the job done. You keep going. You carry everything. Right? Has anybody heard anything different? So no matter what happens, you don't bitch, you don't whine, you just keep going. Suck it up, sunshine. Yes, thank you very much. And if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, that old phrase. But it was a little bit more than that. What I caught myself doing is I was starting to worry about everything. The first thing I thought of when I got up out of bed was, were the line crew going to come in on time? Did the kitchen get broke down? Was everything put away? Even before I'm dressed, even before I'm in the car, I'm starting to carry every single body in that place. Not only carry, and I mean physically carry, like a weight on my back, like a backpack that's pulling me down, the pressure and the stress of what it's like to get this huge property with 125 employees through a shift. Because up until that point, my career was about surviving. Surviving this moment, and then the next moment, and then the next moment, and then this service. But that's not why I got into the business. I got into this business because I thought that there was a possibility that I could actually feel fulfilled and happy every day that I worked. Somewhere along the line, I forgot something. So I was leading the way that I had been led. Yet it wasn't fulfilling for me. It was actually putting me in a state that threatened my health, not only physically but mentally. And I started to question, what the hell am I doing here? A show of hands, has anybody ever had that question in their mind? Ever? And if your hand isn't raised, you're just trying to live it. Let's just face it.
You're in denial. You haven't figured it out.
You're in denial.
Just a river in Egypt.
So taking a step back away from the business and seemingly being miraculously healed, I had to think about going back to the resort. And if this is what it was if this was the end result from a physical standpoint, then could I actually entrust my life to this particular career and craft that I love so dearly? Because I really do. Seeing all you guys here really makes me feel for why I got in this business. So thanks very much. So I went on a discovery of what it was like to be in this business and really, really enjoy every single moment that you could. And what I discovered is that through conversation with a lot of people, the difference between a great chef and a good chef was this thing that they called leadership. But it certainly wasn't the leadership that I was taught. Because the leadership I was taught was kind of brutal, kind of harsh. You know, you march everybody up the hill right into the line of gunfire and you troop through that until the job is done. And then, oh, by the way, get your inventory done. Right? Nobody's leaving. So, but I remembered something that happened a long, long time ago in my career. It was my very, very first chef job. And I was brash, aggressive, assertive, full of myself, full of something else, if you get what I'm saying. And I was incredibly immature. And no one could tell me anything. Okay? I was the next top dog. I was going to come up. I was going to kick everybody off the top of the hill. And I was going to rise to that mantle. In South Florida, where I did most of my career, food scene is very, very, very aggressive. I mean, you got guys at the top like Mark Minatello and Oliver Saucy and Norman Van Aken. And you know, the pinnacle is populated pretty significantly. So you really got to be on your game to be able to knock anybody off that. I was explaining to my girlfriend, who's not in the industry, these type of technology, or these type of terminology, and she said, you know, it sounds more like you're going to war. And it certainly, for me, was. And it wasn't just me. It was everywhere I looked. All you have to do is go on Facebook and see some of these memes where it's, you know, us against them and kind of perpetrating the same conversation about us versus them, front of the house, back of the house, AM shift versus PM shift. And I thought to myself, how can we ever get any clarity and come to a point where we can all work together if it's constantly going to be reinforced where we're against one another? Again, kind of like that war mentality. So I remembered the situation that happened when I my first executive chef job. I was paired with an old guy by the name of Ed Jameson, who was the food and beverage director. And Ed was an old school guy. He worked at the Black Hawk restaurant downtown Chicago. His first job was a meat buyer, where he went down to the stockyards with a stamp and actually stamped sides of beef in the stockyards, where the meat buyer and the meat purveyor were in the office drinking scotch together. He was out there freezing his butt off. So Ed had been around and seen everything. And kind of came across that way. Kind of a little know-it-all, like he was not necessarily putting me down, but he was, you know, trying to correct my behavior or kind of the tack that I was taking. And he and I were like oil and water. Because again, nobody could tell me anything. Until I got into trouble, and I got into real trouble. I started doing cocaine on the job, and I even got my sous chef enrolled in it, and I thought to myself, you know, we'll get through it. It's just a weekend. Anything you need to keep the edge up, to keep going, to keep taking care of the business. And it got out of control. And so I sat Ed down and I said, I got a problem. And he said, okay. I explained to him what was going on, and he said, you got it handled? Did you take care of it? And I said, yeah. He said, it's done. It's over. You'll never see it again. He says, you know what will happen if it does, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, let's go to work. And that blew me away, because I'd never, ever been seen as more than what I did for a job. I'd never been seen for the person that I was, a human being. I was always looked at as the chef. This needed to get done. And he was the first guy to actually emulate, to me, what it meant to be a mentor. He wasn't just a leader. He was someone who was bought in to my growth, not as a culinarian, but as a mature professional. I'm sure all of us have had this experience where we got these hot young guns underneath us, what I like to call the sharpest knife in the drawer, who come up and can't tell them anything because they got all the answers until they run into a problem. So because of Ed, I've dedicated the rest of my career to making sure that that gift that he gave me, that gift of trust and belief, constantly gets paid forward to those who might not necessarily know their own greatness, who need someone to stand for them before they can stand for themselves. And I'm not saying bend over backwards for them. I'm not saying facilitate their behavior. I'm not saying enabling anybody. But I'm saying to be somebody who can model professional behavior in a mature fashion consistently so they have something that they can key on. So that's why I'm here today. For Ed and for everyone else who struggled in the business, and for those mentors who were there for us, and for those mentors yet to be born or grown into, I've dedicated, again, the rest of my career to a radio show, to a blog, to workshops like this, to bring forth the message that I think, maybe, I'm not saying I have the answers or this is true, but I'm saying maybe our definition of culinary leadership might need to change. And I say that to all the venerable professionals that are here in complete and utter respect. But I've seen with my own eyes what works and what doesn't work. I was at Chef Chris Hill's presentation yesterday where he talked about crafting a life beyond the kitchen. And there was a great conversation that happened afterwards amongst some of the people that were there. And it seemed pretty clear to those guys that the change is already here. That whether or not we want to stick with how it's been for us, the change is already here. So we can either be out front of the wave or we can be swept aside. In 2 to 3 years, 50% of the workforce is going to be millennials. Okay? They're not like us. And I mean us, speaking only for myself, is kind of like an old dog in the game. And there's been all kinds of studies on it. And so there's these things that millennials don't trust hierarchy, that they naturally reject authority, that they won't put up with anything less than being honored for the individual that they are in response to the honor that they give or the respect that they give. And I've seen millennials walk right off the job, right off the line, in the middle of the shift. They go, not for me. You can put up with it. I'm not going to put up with it. Because somehow they have a vision for their life that goes beyond putting up with what we put up with. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the way it is. And with 50% of that population coming into the workforce, they'd much rather go mow grass than actually come into a kitchen. And it's not about the work, because, you know, I mowed yards. That ain't easy. That's hard work. So what is it about our culture that keeps them away from jobs which can be incredibly fulfilling and satisfying, not only for a season, but for the rest of their lives? So that's kind of where I started this whole thing. Everybody with me so far? Am I making any kind of sense? Does anybody have any comments for me? None?
You seem to be hitting a lot of what is going on, especially if you teach, which I do, and I'm sure a lot of people here do.
Speaking
I think
of
a lot of
that,
us.
here.
I'm sorry? What a lot of people are finding is exactly what you're saying. When you, as an older person teaching, you're finding that miscommunication. I think a young lady mentioned it yesterday. Her name was Maria. If somebody had been to that, she's hitting upon the same thing, and it's absolutely true. And that's what you're finding. You're finding that disconnect between somebody within their 50s and 60s to someone within their late 20s and 30s. And how do you communicate with each other? Which is not an easy thing to do because we learned a very different way.
Certainly. Absolutely. But I think Chris had an experience where he had a young gal come up to him at the end of the seminar, and she was upset with him because she thought the conversation was going to be more inspiring about becoming a future culinarian. And Chris, for a great presentation, was talking about not only the realities of what our industry is, but the fact that even given those, there's an opportunity to craft a life that's beyond that if we're willing to not cling so tightly to the identity of a chef. me clinging to my identity as a chef is what almost killed me. Because I was a chef, in clothes, out of clothes, everywhere I went, I was a chef. I mean, it got to the point where I was scared to actually say what I did at dinner parties because I'd be working the grill that night. Oh, he's a chef, let him work.
Over and over.
But then the gal didn't stop there. She actually texted him today and said a little bit more. And what Chris did was, I think, beautiful, which was he's like, let's have a conversation. I really want to hear what your perspective is. I think the minute we open up that sacred space of communication, let somebody tell us without judgment, without trying to create an answer in response to what they're saying, that's the beginning step for us as older professionals. Because, you know, I don't know about you guys, but I don't have any answers. I mean, the older I get, the less answers I have. I start to question everything. And all I know is that the way of doing it, the way I was taught, and the way it was emulated for me, wasn't making me very happy. And I would love nothing more than to have you guys walk out with a few ideas and a few tools that you can put into practice that will assist you in having really fulfilled, happy lives. Not to say it's, you know, pie in the sky and every day is going to be great, because we all know that that's not true. But the overarching trajectory or the overarching story of your life will be one of incredible fulfillment and one that you can look back with a lot of pride, because it was about fulfillment instead of achievement. And we'll talk a little bit later about contribution versus attribution. Gosh, that took a little steam out of me, man, telling that story. So before we go any further, I just wanted to say that it's my suggestion today in this new definition of leadership that we lead less and we mentor more. And I say this, that I thought it'd be cool if everybody just took a moment and remembered who it was in their life and in their career who made a difference for them. And we just take a moment not only to honor that, but I'd really like you to turn to the next person next to you and give your name, where you're from, and who that person was, just to say their name out loud. So why don't you guys go ahead and do that? And if you haven't...
My name is Jennifer.
Come on up, guys. Plenty of room. Okay. So, show of hands in the room, who actually had a mentor that made a difference in their career? Okay. Who's aspiring to be a mentor that can change others' careers? Awesome. So how do we do that? Great place to be, right? So I can tell you from an example, one of the examples in my life, and I'll ask the question later what you think it was, but I worked at a restaurant in the coastal in South Florida that did big numbers, huge numbers. And when I came in, the line was kind of fractured, so I had to do a little bit of rebuilding, bring in some new guys. There were some old guys from around. The owner tasked me with creating a brand new menu. I did all my due diligence, station maps, prep lists, purchase lists. I mean, I had it dialed in. Success, right? On paper. And then it came down to prepping the station, stocking the stations, and then training the line cooks to get it done. I had every station pretty much all done until I worked all the way down to the saute. The saute guy was flash. I mean, you watched him on the line and you wouldn't want anybody else in there. But I kept turning around and he was throwing fettuccine in a dish that had angel hair. And I was like, what's wrong? I mean, I got the recipe here. The station map is here. What's the matter? Can't follow directions? And he looked at me and looked at the floor and whispered under his breath, "But chef, I can't read." Now, as a leader, does that matter to me? Did I even care to know? Did I even know anything about him that would indicate to me that he couldn't read? Or was I so focused on getting the job done that all he was a name on a schedule? A position to be filled. Because if he doesn't show up, guess who gets to take that station? Now, by contrast, after I went back to this big resort in Atlanta, or in the Mid-Atlantic region, I didn't say Atlanta. I came back with a different perspective and a different mission. So I was going to see how I could make a difference, moving the mission forward by kind of being underground. And when I mean underground, I mean just beneath the wave. So I started going around every day with my only focus is to be in relationship with each one of the cooks. Sure. Okay? Be in relationship to them. And that took my entire day. It took my entire day, sometimes more than I would like to consider. But what was missing from the people who were actually working at the resort was a sense that they actually were being heard. And it wasn't necessarily that I had to say anything or try to coach them. Because at first I wanted to coach them around a particular problem that they had. Because I wanted to make sure that I was making a difference with a capital D. But I soon found out that that's not what it was about at all. That most people could actually figure out their own problems, figure out their own career trajectory, if only given a point or given some space in which to be able to bounce that off of. So I used to call it 1,000 conversations a day. So there was a guy that worked the dinner line, and as I said, he was one of the sharpest knives in the drawer. This guy was talented, mad talented. And I knew he was a train wreck waiting to happen. Now, I didn't rush to stop it. I didn't throw my body on the tracks. I didn't even try to coach him out of it. What I did is I went up to him and I said, "Cody," and I'm saying this, hoping you're seeing it on the live stream, you bastard, I went to him and I said, "Listen, whenever you're ready, I'm here for you. Okay? But I'm not going to pull a horse to water. I've done that so many times, I got kicked in the chest that it starts hurting after a while. However, giving him the opportunity to opt in was really, really important because it had to be voluntary. Now, it didn't turn out that way. I never really did get a chance to mentor and coach him the way that I wanted to because he ended up getting fired. As it was bound to happen, sometimes you see someone and you just see the writing on the walls. You just know what's going to happen, and there's very little you can do about it. Previously, I would have made that about me. Oh, I don't know how to coach, or I'm a bad mentor, or I'm not a good leader. Until I realized that being a great mentor also means to be neutral and hold them accountable to their actions. And not have it mean anything about me. Which was a huge paradigm shift, because now I could let go of it all. Not to say I was absolved of the responsibility of caring to make a difference, but ultimately if they were going to step in, then they had a mentor for life. Because one of the hallmark characteristics of being a mentor is that relationship lasts for a lifetime. Ed Jameson and I talked 20 years. So now Cody, even though we don't work together, still texts me and emails me about once a month. Because I know that he's ready for coaching and mentoring. But he still is on the edge. Now I could tell him, hey, listen, I'll do it right now, let's go. But there has to be a mutual honoring in the relationship. Okay? So that's as clear an example as I can make between what it looks like to be a leader and a mentor. Now, if you think for a moment that what I'm suggesting is a strategy for operational success, or even a strategy to make yourself feel better, or have a better career, you're kind of missing my point a little bit. And I only mean that the best mentors get out of their head and they come from their heart. This can't be a strategy. It is a fundamental way of doing business and a fundamental way of who you'll be as a professional. The funny thing is that as soon as you start stepping into those shoes and practicing, you see the benefits over all your relationships. You become more patient. You become more grounded. You become more gracious. You become more forgiving. And again, it's not to say that you let people get away with murder, because part of being a mentor is having not only setting clear boundaries, but also making sure that they understand that there's also a certain amount of play between the lines. But outside the lines, there's no more play. So, for me, it comes down to, it's either going to be contribution or attribution. What I mean by attribution is going to be accomplishment. Previous in my career, I was all about accomplishment. I'm not saying that I burned other chefs down to get their jobs, or tried to do things that would be unsavory or not congruent with the way we want to be with one another, but we certainly weren't inclusive as chefs when we were growing up. Each chef was his own island, had his own problems, very rarely shared, withstood the burden. Any of that feel right? Did you guys feel that in your body? There were a few guys out there in the scene that were actually more about being a contribution to one another, about assisting one another, about sharing resources. And to me, that became a bellwether for how we can be all the time. Chef Chris and I share a lot of assets. I do a lot of writing online, so does he, and it's a joy to have him in my life, because not only do we share one another's work, but we also start feeding one another. It's almost like our geniuses are called out by one another. That's why organizations such as the ACF are so important, because they call out our genius. To be affiliated with a group of individuals who are committed to your growth as you are to theirs is a very, very powerful thing. Because out there on the street, it can be very isolating. Everybody knows what it's like to go through season and never see beyond their four walls. Mm-hmm. Right? I publish a lot of stuff online, and I know that chefs are reading it and watching it, and I know that they're all saying the same thing. This is great. I'm much too busy to comment. I'm much too busy to like that. I just put it down and walk away. So the word is getting out, and it's not like not looking for any kind of pat on the back, but I do know that the conversation is at a pivot point in our culture. There was, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, every single major newspaper, Lucky Peach, all ran articles last year about, the declining amount of cooks that are available. And even to a certain extent, where have all the chefs gone? Well, the chefs are getting tired too, so they're leaving. So maybe it's more like the way they were trained is ineffective in today's marketplace, in today's society. That stuff no longer serves. Again, I said, I have lots of questions and few answers, but I want to bring them out. I want to talk about them. I want to create a culture of conversation amongst us. That's why I do the radio show and the blogs, because none of this is possible without all of us together, both young and old, seasoned or not, and there's room for everybody on the bus. So maybe it's not the fact that the millennials would rather cut grass or get $15 an hour versus $12 an hour. Maybe it's just we get to start embodying a different way of being with our employees, so that the word gets out that we're creating a culture that these guys want to be part of. Because if they're respected and honored as individuals, and again, I'm not saying we got to pat everybody on the back and tell them special. It's about being firm and fair and consistent all the way around, and about embodying those deeper, more mature aspects of professionalism that we all want to aspire to. We all need someone to look to and say, yeah, I want to be that. Without being bombastic, without being, shouting at the top of your lungs, without being, engaging in uninitiated behavior, which, looks great on TV, but in the kitchen is pretty bad.
Chef Lamb,
Yes.
what is uninitiated behavior?
Uninitiated behavior. Thank you for asking that question. All right, so currently, just check our time. So there's a whole question about maturity. I was really, really immature. There wasn't a process by which I, as a young man coming into the world, could be initiated like it used to be in the old days, before the Industrial Revolution, when men went out to hunt with their fathers and cousins and uncles, and there were rites of passage by which the boy dies and the man becomes, or the girl dies and the woman becomes. These used to be sacred rituals enacted by every single culture for millennia, and are still, in some cultures, done. The only thing that we have right now is a pseudo-initiation called the military. Sometimes kitchens can feel like initiations, too. Right? Give them the shit job, have them look for the left-handed peeler, things like that. And while that's you know, kind of getting them ingrained into the culture, that's really not teaching them maturity. So, I wanted to make a point about done that. So, there's a lot of misperceptions or a lot of conversation around leadership. I've already kind of made the point that I think this is a red herring. I think it's made up. Really, what we do as professionals is we teach skills, and in the best case, we mentor maturity. So those are two different aspects of what we can be doing. Leading, very often, is just getting a group of people together, organized, and getting them marching in a straight line towards a common goal, which is important. Don't get me wrong. You got to be a great leader. But you can be a good leader and a bad mentor. However, if you're a good mentor, you will always be a great leader. I had a cook come up to me after a year working with me, and he said, "I go to war for you." I wasn't doing anything different with him except making time every day to stop, find out about his family, what's going on, give him an opportunity to maybe rail against what he thought were company policies. And I had to admit to him that they were my policies and take the heat. But it's kind of funny how this is kind of forgotten. And in the best case of apprenticeships back in the day, wasn't that part of being brought up in the business? When you work with a year with a chef, part of that was mentoring maturity. But now that seems to be part. We can't leave it to the schools to do that. It falls upon us as, again, mature professionals to be able to emulate that forward. Did that? Sorry, I knew I was going to be out of place, right? I'm going to skip that one. So, 5 characteristics of a great mentor. Wow. So, the first thing is for both people who are seasoned and unseasoned in the business. The first step to being a great mentor is realizing that you can mentor at any time. Okay? Usually in a mentor-mentee or apprentice relationship, there's a difference of age. But there can also be a difference of skill set as well. If you're taking the time, just if you're working sauté and there's a dishwasher that's constantly at your station because they want to learn, if you're the sauté cook, you can teach them. Now that's not necessarily the same as mentoring, but mentoring from a deeper point means it can happen anytime. Every interaction with an associate or another professional is an opportunity to mentor. And I'm not saying that as an active process. Just realizing that that opportunity exists is a huge thing. Second hallmark of a great mentor is being vulnerable. Now, I worked with a great chef who used to tell me all the time about the menus he did and these competitions he won, and I did this and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But he very rarely told me about the struggles that he had when he was coming up. In my becoming a good chef, it would have been really, really beneficial for me to hear at least a small piece that he shared with me as far as coming up and being confused and not knowing the right word, right place to use, or the right word. That would have been incredibly beneficial to me. And I guess I would welcome you to see these as all gifts that we can bestow at any point. You know, someone made a comment yesterday in one of the workshops that now culinary schools, Jacques Papin said, you know, he had to steal his knowledge. And now, in this day and age, knowledge is given out on a platter. But maturity is not. Professionalism is not. This is the hidden key with which we can make a huge difference in this culture. and understanding that we have the key is part of the battle. Being sincere. Let's face it, nobody likes a braggart. Nobody likes a blowhard. Nobody likes someone who's not going to be sincere and, front up and say, well, you got to put up or shut. Yeah, that's all great. And in the moment, amongst the team, that might be necessary. But it takes a moment, just a moment, to be able to pull him off the side and have a sincere and vulnerable word with him so that he knows that he was heard and that you see that he got what you were pitching. Model best behaviors and practices consistently. Yeah, this one was a little tough for me. Being impeccably groomed is a great model behavior. Keeping your calm under pressure is great, no matter what. I recognize that, we'll teach somebody how to work sauté or work the pass, but we'll never actually role model what it's like for a server to come back and scream at the cook until it happens. And how do we then go to the cook and say, you shouldn't have done that, because he hasn't had anything to model? No one role-played with him. Like, this is how you handle a manager who's irate because you screwed up the meal. Instead, it becomes a shouting match, and it's in the report next day, and someone's getting called down to HR, and they're out the door. And we lost somebody who, in all likelihood, not only we could have saved, but we could have groomed and mentored to be an impeccable professional. And the last one is listen more than you talk. Yeah, again, a little difficult for me. Because I'm so ready to give my knowledge and give my experience, and I have to forbear, I have to hold back and say, they'll get to it. Being a great coach means you drop it and then you let them work it out. Because knowledge that they gain on their own is going to be much more powerful than anything I could have possibly told them. And that's a lot of mistakes that I made, trying to give them the answers every single time. But again, engaging in a conversation where you can listen and then ask the next important question in the conversation without a strategy or judgment around it can have their journey unfold right before them, and you see the penny drop in their eyes, and you know they're off like a rocket. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit, while we have a couple minutes left, about the 3 takeaways. I really appreciate everybody's patience, your good nature, and your contribution. So 3 takeaways I'd like you to have for this particular talk. Number 1, if you haven't, read or get the audiobook, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Anybody read that in the room? Oh, it is awesome. Awesome. It's a short book of Stoic wisdom. Ryan Holiday. The Obstacle is the Way. The next point is, if you have the opportunity, take a coaching course. Because I thought for a lot of years that because I wore a starched white jacket that I was a good coach. Nothing could be further from the truth. I had to go outside of my industry to find a coaching program, to find what it's like to enter into a coaching relationship with someone, create certain boundaries, and then transfer that into a mentorship program. So if you have the opportunity and can, take a coaching course. Any coaching course. For the young ones in the group, okay? Don't look for a job. Look for a mentor, okay? Do your research. Find out if they published anything online. Talk to ex-employees. But the person that you need in your life has got to be something more than, as I said before, like I was, which was a starched white jacket. Anybody in this room can be a great mentor. Anybody. You are exactly what these young people are looking for. It's got to be beyond, when you put in the oil and when you put in the salt. And stay affiliated. Stay affiliated with a group, any group. ACF, Chefs in Shorts. Listen to my radio show, brigaderadio.com. Look at other magazines like foodabletv.com. There are other, Batman Chef Connection is a great website. There's all kinds of resources out there that will talk about and point the direction for something other than how we were trained. And I'm not saying that there's not value in the things that we've learned, because I honor that and respect that. But what I'm suggesting is now it's time for all of us to grow. That our growth as chefs and as mature professionals never ends. And the minute we stop, well, like for me, got real sick. Does anybody have any questions? Any comments?
Thank you.